Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show, I wanted to talk a little bit of NFL today, and there is actually some news in terms of actual football player and his contract situation that I wanted to get into during this segment. And I feel like he's an underrated player. I feel like if you don't live in this player's city, you don't really know how good he is. And it's funny because his team actually won the Super Bowl last year, so you would think his name would be in the news a little bit more, and that is Chris Jones, the defensive lineman of the Kansas City Chiefs, and his name has been in the news a lot over the last couple days regarding his contract situation. And I have a couple points I want to make here about Chris Jones and how I think the Chiefs should be handling this. Do I agree with him about the sides he's coming from? What is really the deal with Chris Jones, if you guys don't know? So that is my job right now, and I'm going to tell you. So basically, I'll start off by saying this. When you ask, basically everyone who follows football, who is the best defensive lineman in football? The answer is always Aaron Donald, and he could very well be the best player overall in football. The dude is that dominant. But at the same time, I feel like just because Aaron Donald is so good and the gap between Aaron Donald and the second best defensive lineman in the NFL is so big that I feel like a lot of the casual fans sometimes kind of undervalue the other really good defensive linemen, whether it's Fletcher Cox. There are a couple other guys out there that are really good, and Chris Jones is one of them. And last year, he was the second best interior defensive lineman in all of football. If you're not familiar with how Chris Jones got to the Kansas City Chiefs and how long he's been there, and these are all really important factors because what we're talking about is his contract. And you guys know, when you're in a service year situation, it really depends on what year you get drafted a lot of times, in order to determine where and when you will be signing. So the Kansas City Chiefs drafted Chris Jones in the second round of the 2015 NFL Draft, and I got to be honest with you guys, he's really done everything a second-round pick should be expected to do. He's been a consistent player for the Kansas City Chiefs, and he's really played out his rookie contract. He was obviously a big contributor to your Super Bowl championship team, and don't get me wrong, when you go from second-round pick to top three interior defensive linemen in all of the National Football League, that's really impressive. And I think Chris Jones absolutely does deserve to get paid long-term by the time his contract with the Kansas City Chiefs is up. He's that good of a player. He's young. He's about to hit his prime. He's a really good player, no doubt. But at the same time, realistically, when I look at the situation closer and closer, I cannot see the Kansas City Chiefs signing Chris Jones to a long-term deal. And I know what a bunch of you guys are saying. Zach, you just hyped this guy up so much. What do you mean you don't think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to sign him to a long-term deal? Why wouldn't they? And there are a couple reasons. Number one, for my Chief fans listening to this show, you guys know you signed Frank Clark to a multi-year extension last year, and you traded for him by giving up a first-round pick. So when you're already paying Frank Clark $20 million, I think it's kind of hard to justify to say, all right, we're paying two guys on our defense over $20 million. As good as both Chris Jones and Frank Clark are, I just don't think you could really do that, especially when you also have to pay your quarterback, which could be the best contract, the most amount of money given to a player in the history of the National Football League. So when I look at this Chris Jones Chiefs situation a little closer and closer, I just don't see him being in Kansas City long term. Another reason why Chris Jones' name was actually in the news this past week was because apparently he's been talking with Le'Veon Bell, the running back of the New York Jets, and the reason why Le'Veon Bell is relevant in this situation is because he was, I don't want to say a similar situation, but he, was considering holding out. That's kind of what Chris Jones is doing right now. And Chris Jones said, I'm going to take advice from Le'Veon Bell if I have to. He said, if I really want to, I should sit out. And I don't really know if that's true or not. I'll tell you why I don't think it is in a second. But the first thing I have to say is this. I don't think Le'Veon Bell should be the guy Chris Jones, as a upcoming free agent at the end of next year, should be taking advice from. You guys know what Le'Veon Bell did for his career in terms of the numbers by sitting out a year. It really depends what your priority is, right? If your priority is getting the most money over the longest period of time, you should not miss a whole season holding out. And I think Le'Veon Bell kind of learned that. But at the same time, what I'll also say is this. If you really value giving your body a year off and you really think that makes that big of a difference, then fine. I guess you should hold out. And if Chris Jones really does feel that way, I guess he does have that right. But here's the reason, beside that, Le'Veon Bell isn't really the best guy to take advice from in this situation. There's another reason why I don't think Chris Jones should be holding out this year in terms of his best interest. I started off this segment talking about Chris Jones and the fact that he was a second-round draft pick, and you guys know what the money situation is when you're a second-round draft pick. You have to be in the league usually playing on your rookie contract for not a lot of money. And that's for about 5 to 6 years, and maybe one more if you include a franchise tag. So 6 years, that's a pretty long time, especially in football years. We all know how grueling and how tough this sport is to play. And Chris Jones has really persevered. He's been on the field basically every game throughout his career. He contributed to a Super Bowl championship team. He is awesome, and I think he deserves to get paid. I just don't think long-term the Kansas City Chiefs are the right spot. But going back to the reason why I don't think Chris Jones should be holding out if he wants whatever is best for him is because of this. Chris Jones, throughout the first 5 years of his NFL contract, has made about $5 to $6 million. And I know to me and you, the talk show host and the average NFL fan, that does sound like a lot of money. But in football standards, when you're as good of a player as Chris Jones, you should probably be making more than that. And eventually, he's going to want to get that $60 million per year contract. The issue is, I just don't think the Chiefs are the team to give it to him. So what the Kansas City Chiefs offered him as a counter was 1 year for $16 million. And I think when you're in Chris Jones and you're in that kind of situation, that money makes sense for you to take because you've only made about $5 to $6 million per year. I understand that next year it would only be a 1 year contract, but let's say he declines it and plays it out, then what could happen to his body? If he gets hurt and he doesn't get that big time money, which is very possible, I would feel really bad for Chris Jones, and that would really be a downfall for his career, but at the same time, it is very possible. So if I'm Chris Jones and I want what's best for me, I'm saying this. I'll take the $16 million. It's not 60 mil, but I think if I take that money, that's good. I play this season out, have a solid season, and then next year, whoever offers me the most money, and I'm telling you, when he hits the free agent market, there will be many teams around the NFL that will be willing to offer him big time money, because I'm telling you, man, this guy is I think the number 2 or 3 interior defensive tackle in the league, besides Aaron Donald and maybe Fletcher Cox. I think it's a little bit of a toss-up there, but this dude is that good, and there will be a team, whoever it is, that team is going to be willing to give him a lot of money. And here's the other reason why. This is another really important point that I think makes it clear to me that Frank Clark will not be a Kansas City Chief long term, is because if the Chiefs really did feel that way, right? If they said, all right, we not only do we want Frank Clark to be here long term, but he's our guy. And if they wanted to move on and they were expecting him to hold out this year, wouldn't have you guys expected him to be traded during, I would say, right before the draft? Like when the Indianapolis Colts, when they traded DeForest Buckner for a first-round pick. I think that Chris Jones is worth a first-round pick. Now, money and draft picks are different. I don't know if there would be a team in the NFL that would be willing to give up a first-round pick for an interior defensive lineman. I understand if you stop the run and you're a good run stopper, that is something that could really help the team aspect. But at the same time, I just don't really know if, that it's worth giving up a first-round pick for, especially when you know how much the NFL GMs value their first-round draft picks. So that would be an interesting thing to track. But when you look at the Chiefs and Chris Jones, I'm a little surprised they didn't trade him, because long term, I don't see them signing him. If the Chiefs sign Chris Jones to a big money contract, then they were, once again, their defense will be the only defense in football to have two guys making over $20 million per year. And when you eventually have to pay Patrick Mahomes, the contract that he deserves after he just won the Super Bowl, that could be something that could really, really hurt your salary and how you manage some of the players on your team. You may still have to pay Tyreek Hill to another big-time contract. Same with Travis Kelce. And you've seen this happen sometimes when you have teams that win a Super Bowl that they think is going to be very good for a really long time, and they're saying, like, we could win one or two more Super Bowls. You guys remember in 2014 when the Seattle Seahawks beat the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 48? That Seahawk team was expecting to come back for a while, and they should have beaten the Patriots after Pete Carroll decided for Russell Wilson to throw the ball instead of running it with Marshawn Lynch. But I think when you look at the Chiefs, man, like, this year is going to be big for them. I think right now their roster could be the best it is right now at better than any time in the Reid Mahomes era from now in the future. Like Hill, Kelce, Edwards-Helaire, Chris Jones if he plays. And I'm telling you, I think Chris Jones will be in a Chief uniform by week 1. But the point I was trying to make was it's very hard to win Super Bowls. That's all I was trying to say. And even though on paper the Chiefs look like they could be the NFL's next big dynasty, I love Pat Mahomes, love Andy Reid. These guys need to take advantage of this window when they have this much talent on this team. Juan Thornhill will be back healthy. Tyrann Mathieu will be back, of course. They bring back 22 out of the 24 starters from the team that won the Super Bowl last year. That is just very impressive. Andy Reid's a great coach. I'm happy for him. He deserved to win that Super Bowl. He's deserved that for such a long time. And the AFC is interesting because we spoke about it last week or on Monday when we were talking about Cam Newton and the Patriots. The Chiefs right now to me are the clear number 1. The Ravens are the clear number 2. But after those two teams, I could really see many different things happening. But anyway, that's going to do it for this segment of the Zach Kroll Sports Podcast. I think Chris Jones is one of the more underrated players in the whole NFL that not enough people know about. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with his contract situation. If I were him, once again, I'd sign that one-year deal for $16 million when you consider, even though it's for 1 year, you would be playing on the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champions, and that would, just that contract right there would be $10 million more than what you've made so far in your professional career.